So I'm going to hand it over to Jane right now, and so she can go over some kind of housekeeping things as we proceed on. Jane?
Yeah, great. Thank you, James. So it's so amazing to see so many of you here. Thank you again for your time. And we just wanted to give you a little bit of a background in relationship to this training, as well as some kind of framing for the next two sessions post this one. So this is kind of what we're going to cover today. And, you know, when we originally got this grant, as James said, we had planned these were in-person training. So there were kind of 3 days of intensive focus on intellectual property. And obviously we're not going to be able to do that as deeply as we would like to do with only 6 hours, 2 hours each session. But we still think it's really important, and we know that the need is there to have this information around intellectual property and negotiating control of collections as well as data, and so decided to run this training regardless. So today what we're really going to focus on is James and the story of Penobscot Nation's experience around intellectual property and kind of what they've been doing and where they've kind of got to, which really forms the basis of most of this training and kind of what it works around. And so that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. And then tomorrow, we are going to look more closely at copyright basics, intellectual property and digitization, social media and intellectual property, as well as kind of tribal governance models and tools around memorandums of understanding and tribal policy and protocols. Tomorrow's session will be facilitated by Dr. Trevor Reed, who is from the Hopi Nation, and Professor Darren Ranko, who is from the Penobscot Nation as well. And so they will both be the facilitators tomorrow, talking through copyright as well as some of the strategies that have been deployed to regain control of collections and data. And then on Thursday, in our final session, we'll kind of talk a little bit about some of the digital tools or resources. Some folks have talked a little bit about the traditional knowledge labels. We'll talk about those, as well as the kind of return of the Passamaquoddy sound recordings and changing some of the digital infrastructures at the Library of Congress, as well as the Penobscot traditional knowledge labels as well. We'll be joined by Donald Soktoma from the Passamaquoddy tribe, who's the tribal historic preservation officer there, who will join us to talk about their experiences as well. And then this is kind of the lead into another grant that we have, which we're hoping to run in person towards early next year is when that will start. It's already started, but we had to pause because of COVID, which does in-person training in Arizona, New York and Alaska, where we're kind of focusing much more and have, it's a 5-day intensive training where we have stipends for people to attend as well, focusing much more on we have a copyright lab. We're including some of the work around Indigenous data sovereignty with our colleagues from the Native Nations Institute, Stephanie Carroll in particular, as well as developing agreements and data governance. So we'll just be talking a little bit about that. So if we understand today is kind of part of a beginning, that we're kind of in a journey to go on together. This is kind of how we consider it and we think about it. And again, we're grateful for your time and to be here. And I'm going to hand it to you, James, to tell the Penobscot story.
Thank you, Jane. Can everybody see my screen? Green screen that says Penobscot Research Review. I got a lot of thumbs up. All right, let's see. I'm going to shake off the last Zoom call a little bit before I get into this. So this presentation is kind of the history of what we at Penobscots have generally called Penobscot Research Review. It has changed names over time, and you'll see that, but essentially it serves the same purpose that we want to review research in our community. So research is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. When mentioned in many Indigenous contexts, it stirs up silence, it conjures up bad memories, raises a smile that is knowing and distrustful. So I really like this quote because this really encapsulated how we at Penobscot Nation were feeling when we started to really think heavily about how we were going to deal with research in our community. And this all really came to a head, and we decided to seek some assistance at the tribal level. And what we wanted to do was we had an issue in our community. We had a linguist who was working on a dictionary with elders in the community, doing a lot of research. And we had a couple of people who worked with this linguist. His name was Frank Siebert. He was actually a retired pathologist. And if anybody has seen the New Yorker article recently by Alice Gregory, she talks a lot about Frank Siebert in our language program. But Frank had two primary helpers. He had Carol Dana, who's an elder in our community and now our language master, and also a woman who just retired from the University of Maine. When she was working with Dr. Siebert, she used her work time, work computers, and information gathered at work to get her PhD. And when the tribal council found out about this, they were quite upset. And so a group of volunteers in the late 90s decided to create what we called the Penobscot Heritage Preservation and Protection Committee. And they developed rules for research, publications, recordings, and other media at that time. They also developed policies and procedures and a project request form. So if someone wanted to do something with the community, they could do so. And this is a quote from some of the documents that came from them. It said, "The Penobscot people have promulgated and passed these rules to protect their rights to privacy and to Penobscot intellectual resources. Due to continued abuse, misrepresentation, and exploitation of the rights of our people, it is necessary that guidelines be established and strictly followed so as to protect the rights of the present and future 7 generations of Penobscot people." So right out of the gate, there was a really strong statement and a strong push. This committee got the unfortunate nickname of being a hatchet committee. They didn't allow anything to go through. They just said no to everything, which became problematic because we had a young, well, he wasn't that young, but we had a tribal member who was an anthropology student who wanted to republish a book that was really important to the community, and this committee said no to him. And so they lost a lot of credibility through that process. So in the early 2000s, the Cultural and Historic Preservation Department was formed. And part of the formation of that department was the Cultural and Historic Preservation Committee. I was the first chair of that Cultural and Historic Preservation Committee, and we took over the research review duties from that Penobscot Heritage Preservation and Protection Committee. One of a few things that were good that happened is we published a book along with the author, or the editor in this case, because it was a republication of a journal, Wabanaki Homeland in the New State of Maine, the 1820 Journal and Plans of Survey of Joseph Treat. Joseph Treat was hired by the state of Maine right after statehood in 1820 to do a survey up the Penobscot River, and Joseph Treat subsequently hired a Penobscot guide and really gave us a snapshot of Indian occupation on the Penobscot River. This book is full of maps and a lot of place names in the Penobscot River Valley come from this text. We co-published this with Micah Pauling. But a couple of black eyes that also happened was there was a married couple who likened themselves as musicians, and they had taken our traditional Penobscot songs and set them to flute music. And we're selling these traditional Penobscot songs along with the music, the notation. And they came in front of the Cultural and Historic Preservation Committee. And one of our elders on the committee told them that they were breaking the arts and crafts law. And so with that information, they told us in that meeting that they were going to do away with, all the recordings and turn over anything they had already recorded to us. And then they got home, did a little homework, and found out, in fact, that that law was not relevant to what they were doing. And so again, another black eye on the committee, and we all assumed that she was right, and move forward from there. But it really showed me that there was a lot of work that needed to be done at the committee level as we were dealing with these issues. So about the same time, the state of Maine had passed a law that says all schools in the state of Maine have to teach Maine Native American history and culture as part of the curriculum. And so there was a huge outpouring of outreach into communities to have speakers in the school and proper curriculum and all of that. And we worked pretty early on ensuring that that happened at a tribal level. But there was an actress, a woman in Belfast, Maine, who decided to take on the persona of a performer, one of our ancestors. Her name was her stage name was Molly Spotted Elk, and she was a vaudeville dancer. You can see her picture here. But this woman would dress up like this as Molly and go and perform, and was marketing to schools as authentic Penobscot teachings. And my phone was ringing off the hook with, elders, especially female elders in the community, who were quite offended. And we had asked her to come in front of the committee, and she said, "No, I'm not going to go there and get speaking down to by you people." And so all we could do was reach out to all the schools in the state of Maine. And what we did was we put together a guide to addressing that law, and put together a list of people you could call to that are approved by the communities, and also some things to stay away from. And guess who was on one of the lists of things to stay away from? This person. So as the Cultural and Historic Preservation Department grew, it was a need to start integrating other positions. Can I get everybody to mute? Sounds like someone's moving furniture. So there was a need to add a tribal historian position, and someone to attend to schools' requests, but also to study our history. So we developed this tribal historian job description, and part of that was we folded in some of these duties to ensure that that research review process took place. And I wrote the job description for this position, and because I was chair of the committee, and I ended up getting the job. And I often say, be careful of what you ask for. Don't put anything in a job description that you don't want to do. So I had to step down from chair, and I became the tribal historian some years ago. But some of the things in the job description was assist in the development of research review protocols and policies, also assist in the development of a cultural misappropriations protocol, and then coordinate activities necessary to research review projects by non-tribal members. So in 2011, we implemented something, or we implemented a committee that was going to look at Penobscot Nation IRB, an institutionalized review board. So the Penobscot IRB, I introduced to our tribal council by way of a council action request. And I wanted representatives that worked in a broad array of arenas within the tribe. So I asked for representatives from each tribal department and other relevant organizations. We set forward a 2-year training period to develop our IRB. And we met with the University of Maine IRB. Our main community is 2 miles from the University of Maine. So we met with the University of Maine IRB board, and we've been working with them closely ever since. We brought in an expert on developing IRBs in Indigenous communities, is Dr. Bill Freeman. Flew him out and spent about a week with us and kind of listened to what we had to say and what we wanted. And what was really interesting at the end of that week, he kind of said, you know, that Penobscots want way more than what an IRB can do, because IRBs have a very strict set of guidelines and protocols, because each IRB gets a designation called federally wide assured. And this federal wide assurance is important because if you are unable to get your research project through one IRB, you can go to any IRB. They all have equal weight and equal standards. So he said that some of the things we wanted, like especially around cultural misappropriations, that we had to kind of rethink what that was. So we started looking at restructuring. Okay, we probably do want an IRB, but we definitely want something else. Meanwhile, I was working on a ANA grant to revitalize our language. In 2012, the Cultural and Historic Preservation Department applied for one of these called Recovering Our Voices Language Immersion Project. And what we found out was that, and this is at the 11th hour, this was at that time, I don't know if you guys write grants, but it's due like in a week and you're like going, oh my God, and no one's answering your emails. We found out that the University of Maine, sponsored by that woman who got her PhD through our language program, by the way, the University of Maine paired with the American Philosophical Society, which houses our language materials. They wrote a grant to the NSF to do a lot of work with our dictionary, and a lot of work that I was proposing to do in my grant. And we found this out in the 11th hour because they had never approached the community about this grant. And so it put our grant in jeopardy. I remember Carol Dana, our language master, on her hands and knees yelling into the speakerphone in the middle of the table of the council chambers, yelling at this woman from the University of Maine. They had a long history of working together. They had already submitted, and they were kind of waiting to see if they got funded. So I asked for the grant application, and over a long weekend, I rewrote our grant to not only go around this grant, but actually to dovetail what they were doing, which was a really bad idea because they did not get funded. And so now I had holes in my grant, and I had to help them get funded on the next annual cycle, which they did. The biggest reason why they didn't get funded, no community involvement. And so my grant was lagged behind for a year. But one of the things that we did in this grant, this Recovering the Voices Language Immersion Project, our project goals was to stabilize, protect, and enhance the Penobscot as a spoken language of the Penobscot people. 3 objectives: electronic immersion, which we digitized our whole dictionary, had speakers speak the words and recorded those. We had televisions bringing Penobscot to the ear. We created Sesame Street type of language learning that we pumped out on these TVs that were in places in the community. And then the last one, which is relevant here, is protecting our voice. And the protecting our voice piece, we had researched and developed the legal and the policy framework needed to protect our sovereign intellectual property rights to our language. We created a subcommittee around intellectual property rights. We research intellectual property issues pertaining to Indigenous languages. We drafted intellectual property policy statements covering Penobscot language, and we signed an MOU with the University of Maine around our more than just the language and dictionary stuff. And we are still negotiating with the American Philosophical Society about our materials there. So what was interesting about this whole process in the post-award ceremony, I think I went to, Washington, Vancouver, Washington, just across from Portland, Oregon, and they had me stand up. They're like, Penobscot Nation, stand up. And they said that this is the first time they've ever provided language funds to help a tribe protect their intellectual language rights. So we were kind of moving in the right direction. So this is Dr. Bonnie Newsom. She was actually my first boss. She was the chair of the original Cultural and Historic Preservation Department. She's Penobscot. And she had her master's degree when she worked for the tribe as both the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation. But she wanted to get her PhD. So she left and went to UMass at Amherst to get her PhD. And she applied for a project through Simon Fraser University called IPINJ, Intellectual Property Issues in Cultural Heritage. So this project called for her to work with the community around certain issues around intellectual property and cultural heritage. And she needed a committee. And I had a committee and was looking for something to do. We were still working on the IRB piece. But this project really helped us to synthesize what we really wanted. This was a very intensive, every Thursday for like 2 years, we worked on this project. And I still get, like I have muscle memory. Every Thursday afternoon, I get a headache, even to today, because of this. Just really hard, but rewarding work. So through that process, we actually created what we call today the Perturbed Board, which is an acronym we really like, the whole Perturbed thing. But Penobscot Tribal Rights and Resource Protection Board. And many of us in this picture, except for the gentleman on the far right, still serve on this board. There's actually 11 of us who serve on this board. And the makeup of the board, they have kind of 3 legs. We have the IRB leg. We have an intellectual property committee. Intellectual property committee, we do negotiations of MOUs. We also identify what is Penobscot intellectual property. What's the difference between, Penobscot art and Penobscot traditional art? What do we want to save? What do we want to protect? These is like a lot of questions that it's where the headaches came from. And then we had an education committee. We needed to educate the tribal populace that we had this process going on, that if somebody was knocking at your door, calling you up to say, hey, I want to do an interview with you, you need to let them know the tribe has a process for that. And also the education committee began to reach out to foundations and funding organizations, because a lot of times we'd get knocks on our door and someone says, yeah, I got a grant to work with you folks. Really? So we wanted to let foundations, other IRBs and other colleges in the in the state of Maine know that we had this process. And so this is what the education committee does. So all 11 of us serve on a variety of these boards and do an array of things. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this board at all. It is a ton of work. It is not only for myself and the clerk, who is also our TIPO, and so we both work full time for the tribe. But it is a lot of work for those committee members to do some of these work. And sometimes people are throwing, a 400-page manuscript of a novel they want to write, and it's about your tribe. And so it is a lot of work and requires a lot of energy. And but we're working currently on how to streamline that and put the onus on the people who are providing us with the information and less on us. We use Mukurtu as a platform. The Perturb board has a section of this, and so any documents that we got, we just kind of pluck them into Mukurtu, and our board, the only people who can get in there and download these things and look at them. It allows a nice platform for us to communicate with each other, but also we are busy developing what's called our Penobscot collections. We just had the Abbey Museum collection was delivered to us a few months ago. We're still kind of, the board is kind of going through that stuff and make sure they're all labeled correctly as far as the metadata, but also putting TK labels on those if needed. And Hudson Museum at the University of Maine, likewise. And we're negotiating with other institutions to get their collections there too. And we also have another IMLS grant, which we're just closing out now, where we've digitized our complete collection at the Penobscot Nation Museum, which was a huge nightmare because the professionalness of previous employers weren't as high as they could have been, and it was a hot mess to say the least. But we think we've got to sort it out, and putting it on a digital platform really helped us to kind of see where we were at and photograph everything, and it worked out really well. One of the great things about Mukurtu, it allowed us to, we've digitized our whole dictionary. So now we have these sound files that go with every word, both in male, Gabe Paul, and female, Carol Dana. You can see those little recordings here on the screen, Carol and Gabe. But this is also any cultural heritage item that we have within the museum or other museums that we've uploaded to Mukurtu. We can put these dictionary links with it. So it does two things. It really textures our collection with language, but it also, when someone's looking up a word, they can see, what a Holland is. You can see what that powder horn is, what it looks like, and where is that? Oh, it's at the Penobscot Nation Museum, or it's at this museum, And it really allows us to kind of cross-pollinate between language and cultural heritage items. So I'm not going to get too deep into this, local context and the traditional knowledge labels, because Jane will get mad at me for stealing her thunder later in the training. But we've gone through all of these processes. We've even designed a couple of labels ourselves, because we're using Mukurtu in such a way that we wanted to use the labels to help inform our population. And these are the two that we created. The TK culturally sensitive one. There is one that is, I always forget the name of it. There is a label that is secret sacred, and it's really grounded in like NAGPRA stuff, and it's funerary items and et cetera, et cetera. And we were really looking for something where our language could nestle nicely, and this label could use to protect our language. And so we decided to go with the symbol for secret sacred, which is just that box. And then we wanted to add this kind of component that we wanted it culturally sensitive. So something that was not necessarily secret sacred, but was really important to our community and something that we wanted to protect. So we designed this culturally sensitive label, and was super honored that Jane added it to the suite of TK labels at Local Context. The second one is called Community Voice TK label. And part of the way we're using Mukurtu in interacting with our community is where we see these digital heritage items that we're getting from institutions all over, these Penobscot items that people haven't seen for a long time. We're seeing these as an opportunity to expand our historic voice. We want people to share stories about things. If they see a basket and their grandmother used to make a basket like that, we want them to share those stories. If they see a document that really resonates with them and their great grandfather used to tell them the story, we want them to share that. We're trying to elicit community voice out of people. And so we wanted a label that kind of teased that out of folks. And so we created this one. It's one of the very few inward-facing TK labels. Most times, as you'll come to find out, they're really for getting community voice and authority in other institutions. But here, we wanted to speak to our own population. Abbey Museum, which I'm co-chair of in Bar Harbor, Maine, is a museum that's going through a decolonizing process. I often say that Abbey Museum is the first museum when it comes to decolonizing, at least alphabetically. And we're really looking, we just hired a Wabanaki executive director. His title is actually executive director and senior partner to Wabanaki Communities, because without that second piece, the senior partner to Wabanaki Communities, without the Wabanaki Communities, we wouldn't be a decolonized museum. And so for a museum that was started in 1928, this is a huge thing. It represents the Penobscots, Passamaquoddies, Maliseets, and Micmacs within Maine. And in addition to the board of directors, there's also what's called an Abbey Council. And this council was two people from each tribe in Maine. Their chief and council appointed them to work with the Abbey. So there was representatives who were appointed by the leadership of each community that actually sit at the top tier of leadership at the Abbey Museum. We liken it to a canoe. The Abbey Council, which was appointed by the communities, sit in the stern of the canoe, and they can steer the canoe down the river. and the Abbey board is in the bow of the canoe, taking care of things that are more immediate. Canoeing down the river, the person in the stern steers, whether you're going river left or river right, and the person in the bow has an important role, making sure we don't hit that rock, which is coming up right now, or let's take that channel around this set of whitewater or whatever. So we use this analogy of the canoe, which is extremely appropriate in our cultures. Back in 2017, we signed a MOU with the University of Maine. This is our chief, Chief Kirk Francis, with Susan Hunter, the former president of the University of Maine system, and they're signing this historic MOU. And this was the work of the Perturb board. And we worked back and forth for a couple of years to refine this document. You would send it to the university, and their lawyers would look at it and kick it back, and look at it and then kick it back to them. And it went back and forth and back and forth. It was quite a process, which Dr. Jane Anderson was leading the way the whole time, which I'm very thankful for. Historic moment. Actually got the University of Maine to admit that their campus sits on traditional Penobscot territory, which has been a huge contention for many years. And there's a long history around that, which I'm not going to get into. So one of the huge benefits of working in this digital platforms, and I've been collecting images of Penobscots for a long time, 20,000 images. We did an oral history project in the community, and after that, I had elders coming up to me with their shoe boxes full of pictures. I want you to share these pictures, and so we just started digitizing them and putting them into the collection. And we got this disc one day from the Smithsonian with a bunch of our cultural heritage items on it, and Charles Shea, this is one of our eldest elders today. He's 90, I think he's 97 this year. Charles Shea, he's World War II POW, storming the beach at Normandy. First wave, was a medic, didn't even have a sidearm on. He is got the Legion of Honor from France. He's a highly decorated soldier, and we're not sure, but we think he's one of the last remaining Native Americans to storm the beach at Normandy. So he actually lives in Normandy today. There was a wealthy lady who took him in, unfortunately took him away from the community which he was living in, but he moved over there, and she parades him around, and but he's happy. So, but when he was in the community, he had found this picture. This is a picture of his mother when she was, I think, 16 years old or so. And it was in the garage, and something had fallen and ripped this picture. And as a graphic artist, he took it to me. He said, "Oh, can you fix this?" I said, "Well, I can't really fix it." He goes, "Well, at least digitally so I can print it and it won't have the scar on it." And it was damaged on her right shoulder, as you're looking on the left here. And as I was working on it digitally, kind of recreating where the rip was, I recognized that she was wearing a collar, and not just any collar, a collar that I recognized from the discs that was given to us from the Smithsonian. It's not this collar in the picture, but it was one very similar to this. And as soon as I told him this, he's like, "Well, I want it back." And I says, "Well, there lies the problem." He goes, "Well, I want one." And so he actually hired an artist in the community named Jennifer Neptune to bead by bead almost recreate that collar that his mother was wearing. And this picture of them here, Charles and Jennifer, is the day that she unveiled it to him, and we had a press conference. And when she put that on his shoulders, there was this wave of energy that went through the room. About knocked me over. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And what was really touching for me was, I'd seen these things in dozens of times in museums, in archives, but I'd never seen someone have one put it on them. And so with, that project was kind of fresh in our mind, and we had done this oral history project that I was telling you about, and we had gotten 350 pictures from the American Philosophical Society, which an anthropologist named Frank Speck had taken in the 19 teens when he was writing the book Penobscot Man. I took these 350 photographs as an oral history project into the community. It was like really intimidating for me as a young historian to go into my community and do research, because research is such a dirty word. And so one of the things that I came up with was, let's just make a photo album and show them pictures. And so I had all these elders, and we went around and I just recorded them talking about the pictures. And one of the pictures came up was this guy here in the middle, the black and white photograph. His name is Peter Nicola. And Peter Nicola was our chief at the time when Frank Speck had visited our community. In fact, the inauguration of the chief ceremony that is written about in Penobscot Man was Peter's inauguration. And so when elders had seen this, they would like point at it and they'd say, that's the official chief's collar and cuff set. We need to get that back. And it's at the Hudson Museum at the University of Maine. And it was, we knew this. There it is up in the upper left-hand corner, pinned to a board. And when we would inaugurate our chief, they would allow us to take him out of the museum, which is just a couple miles away, and bring them to our facility when we inaugurated the chief. But, you can't touch them. You can't take them off the board. And which was a real big problem, because part of our ceremony and our chief making is for him to don these things, because that collar, we actually say, this is the weight of responsibility on your shoulders. And these cuffs, these shackle you to the people. And so there's actually a physical need to don these. And we were watering down our ceremonies when we were inaugurating our chief. So I went back to the National Park Service, who I did the oral history project through. They funded it and said, hey, this came up during our last funding process with you folks. I says, the people want a chief's regalia back. And so we hired Jennifer Neptune again to recreate, not bead by bead this time, but a modern interpretation. We wanted something that was, you can see it just below the other ones, very clean looking. We wanted kind of the same design scheme, but we also wanted it to have a modern, clean look and, really embrace moving forward was really important to us. And we had all the living chiefs that had served in that position handle it and put it on. And, we had the ceremony around it. And we created the headdress, and we had a community forum to say, well, what kind of feathers, because typically, traditionally, it used to be turkey feathers that would have been in the chief's headdress from here. But everybody in the community, they wanted eagle feathers. And so we called out to all the families. We got 24 clans, and all the families to, donate some feathers. And we got so many feathers. And so Jennifer, picked through them. And Jennifer's my wife, by the way, and we still have this box of feathers here at the house. But she picked through the feathers, got 24 of them. And I was like, what are you going to do with the rest of them? She's like, well, I can't give them back, because every single one of those people who gave us feathers think it's in the chief's regalia. So we have all these feathers. We give them out during ceremonies. But this whole digitization project, these are just this tale of these two collars really show what can be done in the community at a very tangible level. Once you get these digital items back in your community and people start to look at them and they share stories and say, oh, we need to recreate this. is a really important process for us. And, Chief Francis, who you see here, he was the first chief to be inaugurated in this. And, he's our longest running chief in the modern era. And I think he's going on 16 years. So he's been around a while. And that leads us to here. So thank you all for listening to me just prattle on. I'm glad that you all have joined us. And we use this image here to kind of advertise our education in intellectual property and tribal governance for negotiating with cultural institutions workshops. Because if you were to come to Maine for this training, we have a cultural tourism program, and we're going to all give you canoe trips down the river for a day. But unfortunately, we can't do that. This is one of our main guides and council member, Jason Padilla, shuttling a group of the clients down the Penobscot River. But thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to volley it back to Jane for any more housekeeping. If she had to get off. So I am going to set you all free. I think that we have same time tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure what time that translates to you folks, because I know some of you are on the other side of the world and some of you are in Alaska and other places. But I am going to stop sharing, turn my video on, and thank you all for coming. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, hearing Trevor and Darren tomorrow. And Walimani, have a good evening, folks.
Kia ora,
Thank you.
James. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namahe, James.
James, we opened in prayer. Could we close in prayer too?
Yes, if you would like to, thank you for doing that. Do you have something to
Sure.
share, Peter?
I'd be happy to close us out.